Hi, I'm Liza Graves. I am the founder of StyleBlueprint, a digital luxury lifestyle publication. On our podcast, 20 Minutes, we dive into the topics of marketing, PR, and entrepreneurship. Over the past 15 years, we have worked with thousands of clients, and most have the same questions and struggles when it comes to these topics. By shining a light on these topics each week, we hope to get better together. We are joined today by Deborah Vahle, and she is with CityLiving Group here in Nashville, Tennessee. She is a specialist in home sales as well as short-term rental and development. And so we are so happy to have her as we talk about this big ruling from the about the National Association of Realtors and how that is going to change everything, or at least that's what the headlines say for us. So, Deborah, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh, we are thrilled to have you. I've been listening to all these journalists speak about, their crystal ball and what's going to happen. And, it's the time of year, right? It's a political year. Everyone's looking into their crystal ball. I want to read to you just kind of a quick, what I understand to have happened. And therefore, any of our listeners can be caught up as well, in case they don't know, because sometimes I'm under a rock and I'm going to assume some of our listeners are too. In a groundbreaking class action lawsuit, the National Association of Realtors has settled for $418 million over accusations of conspiring to inflate real estate agent commissions. This case highlights significant transparency issues with the U.S. housing market's brokerage fee system, spotlighting the often overlooked negotiation power sellers have over agent fees. So with that, as the synopsis, I'm going to assume that chatter around the office at CityLiving has been super interesting over the past week.
Yes, to say the least. It's definitely been the hot topic, and we've had many meetings discussing the ruling and how we can best prepare our clients, how we can best prepare our agents. It's been a really interesting discussion to have. But overall, what the law does is kind of two things. So first, it says, hey, if you are going to take a client out, you have to have a buyer's rep agreement signed. This really isn't a change of best practice. Most agents who take buyers out do have a buyer's rep agreement signed, but some agents don't. Maybe they take someone out a couple times before they really get that agreement signed. So now that will have to stop. They will have to have a buyer's rep agreement signed. What that buyer's rep agreement says is how much that buyer's agent is going to get paid when they complete a sale for that client. So if the buyer's rep agreement says that buyer's agent's fee is 2%, if that says the buyer's agent fee is 3%, then that becomes part of the negotiation now when they submit an offer on a home.
Got it. So your negotiation at this point becomes, if I'm the buyer and you're my realtor and I have an agreement with you, when I show up, part of me bidding on the home means, and you're going to cover this agreement that I have right here. And then the seller has the ability to come back to me and say, yeah, actually, I'm only going to cover 1%. You're going to have to cover that 2 or 3% more, or 1 to 2% more typically. Okay.
Exactly. So the second thing that the ruling does is doesn't allow agents to disclose on the MLS what the buyer's agent commission is. So right now, today, if you go on the MLS, then as an agent, we can see that seller is willing to pay 3% commission or 2.5% commission. We can see that's a field that we fill out when we put a listing on the MLS. So now with this ruling, that's not allowed to be there. And the thought behind it is, hey, our agent's not showing homes that don't have a higher commission. Now, as an agent, I would say that's not been the case. You're going to show homes that your buyer wants to see, and then it's going to be a negotiation if you have a larger fee than a higher fee than what the seller's offering. But the two changes are you have to have the buyer's rep agreement signed, and the commission to the buyer's agent cannot be disclosed on the MLS. So what has happened? Yeah.
No, go ahead.
Well, so best practice and how it usually happens as far as commission for the buyer's agent is the listing agent has already had a discussion with the seller. Hey, this is all negotiable. We can offer whatever you want to offer. this buyer's agent, here's what my fee is. Here's what I recommend offering a buyer's agent. And the seller can decide to offer that or not offer it. Now, if they want agents to show the home, and if they want to get the best agents into their home, then we usually recommend that they offer some sort of compensation, because it's not about the agent as much. The agent needs to get paid for their work, but the buyer is going to be on the hook for whatever compensation their agent, has agreed to, they've agreed to in their buyer's rep agreement. So if the buyer sees that the seller is unwilling to pay commission to their buyer's agent, they know that's going to be an additional expense that they're going to have to bring to the table now.
Right. So it might bring the cost of the home down, but the buyer has extra money that falls outside of that mortgage that they're getting that they have to come up with in order to close the contract in that scenario.
Right. Exactly.
And you have a contract going into it. Now, are you able, with the negotiation of the house, then are the realtors involved able to negotiate that fee that they have a contract for, and then say, in order for this to close, we've got to do something here? Would that ever?
Yeah. And I would say sometimes that happens even now. Sometimes, it's just everybody's so close, right? You're so close on the number. And the agents may be like, look, I'll give some if you give some. Right. And so, that happens now. But yes, it will become a larger part of that negotiation. Yep.
All right. So let me ask you this. With so much confusion around this right now, and there are many homes that are on the market right now, and as a realtor, you have your clients that you have a contract with right now, both on the buy side and the sell side. So in the conversation right now with kind of confusion around this, what does that conversation look like?
It's surprising, but actually, none of my sellers have approached me with a conversation about this yet. And I would say because the ruling hasn't been finalized, the proposed settlement is out there. Settlement has to be approved by the judge. So these won't go into effect until July. So current sellers, that conversation isn't happening as much. But for every single listing appointment we go on from now forward, it's going to be part of the conversation. And when we sit down with our buyers, it's going to be a bigger part of the conversation.
If I were the person putting my home on the market, or if I were the person out looking for a home, to have that conversation up front, that's going to tell me I have a transparent realtor who is addressing this, who isn't trying to skirt anything under the rug, so that's great to have that transparency. I do want to ask about commercial real estate. While this ruling does not apply to commercial real estate, I think commercial real estate is an interesting case study to look at, because they have not had the National Association of Realtors over that, but there are kind of standards for that commission as well. Or do I have that wrong?
There are definitely kind of the standards, I guess you could say. It's tough to say standards because it's really negotiable. It's very much up to the seller still. But it's one of those things. When you go into a restaurant, you're going to probably tip 20%.
Right.
Depending on the service, but that's kind of standard.
Unless you're my parents' generation.
Right. That's a whole other conversation. You're
putting the cash on the table behind them.
Let's just put 50% tip on your coffee. Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah. So, yes, there is kind of that understood, here's what this, percentage is. But yeah, in commercial real estate, you still have, that 5 to 6% commission overall that seller ends up usually paying.
That makes sense. So, and another just kind of case study to think about when, I'm hearing all this stuff. Like I listened to a podcast last week and it was saying that, and I hope I get these figures right, $100 billion will go towards realtors' fees, or did in the past year. And they expect this ruling to lower that by 50%. And I was like, I just don't see that happening personally, is how I thought. But and that it will also bring home prices down. And I know from speaking with you earlier that you said that there's a great case study about this in Seattle, which I was not aware of. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about that? I thought that's super interesting.
They've been doing this in Seattle already for the past 2 years. They've had these rules in place, and overall, it hasn't changed home prices. and it hasn't really changed what the agents are getting paid. So after, they kind of all got used to the new system, then everything leveled out, and you still see, home prices. I mean, it just didn't change anything. It didn't move the needle.
Mm.
And I think the reason for that is that, you may have a race to the bottom with some brokerages. You may have some brokerages saying, hey, we will represent you as a buyer's agent for a flat fee. Okay. So let's say it's $1,000. Well, there are not going to be very many buyer's agents who last and stick around. It's going to have to be a numbers game for them to make an income that is a livable wage, because a buyer's agent usually will spend months working with a client before they ever get paid. If they're only getting, let's say, a flat fee of $1,000 or a flat fee of $5,000 for representing that buyer's agent, they just worked for 4 months for that. So they are going to have to work with 30, 40 people. I couldn't imagine representing 40 buyers at the same time. So you're just not going to get the same level of service. If a buyer thinks that's to their advantage, or sellers say they're not going to pay, or if that becomes a thing, then you're going to have a race to the bottom. You're not going to get the cream of the crop, and the people who are going to suffer are the buyers, who are now having to deal with an agent who either doesn't have time to give them that they really need to fully represent them on a contract, or they're going to just potentially have pitfalls and inspections and things like that, that maybe that agent who's not as experienced just doesn't know.
Yes, I will say that, not that I have sold many houses, bought many houses along the way, but it's always, always, always after we've figured out the price and that negotiation, that's when the hard work begins. All the 100%. Homes that I've bought have been pretty quick. Like, I found them, I've bought them, but it's always, man, it's like, are we actually going to get this house is how it feels. Always.
Yeah.
Is that standard?
There's so much. Like, oh yeah. I tell people 10% of what I do for you is getting you under contract. The other 90% is after we get under contract. There are so many things that happen. And anytime you're dealing with human beings and money, things are going to get a little, touch and go in negotiations. I mean, inspection, appraisal. Yeah, significant money. Exactly.
I think you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of situation, which is, let's say you have a client, their home is on the market for 1 week. Everyone knows these new rules, so it's kind of front of mind. 1 week gets under contract, and they're sitting there thinking, well, gosh, that wasn't so hard for you. And this, I just paid you this, right? But at the same time, they're under contract under 1 week, not under 6 months. That's got to be tough, because of course they're leaning on you in order to get their house. What does my house need to look like? What should the price be? You're doing all this work to give them the best scenario to have that sell. But it's kind of like, if it sells too quickly, they're like, well, what did I need you for? I could see people saying that.
Yeah, I would say, you listened, we priced it correctly, we got the house ready, and yeah, it did sell quickly because we did the things that we needed to do to get it sold quickly. That's great. I mean, that's just how it works. Yeah. And I would say, if you did those things and it got under contract quickly, that means that, you probably got more for it than if it had sat on the market. So yeah,
because if you price it correctly and it sells quickly, you typically get a higher amount than if it sits on the market and you start having to bring the price down. What questions, I just want to take away for anyone listening. So what questions should a potential home buyer ask to their potential home lister, to the realtor on that side? What questions? I think we've covered that, but is there anything that you feel like your insider knowledge, people really should be asking on the front end, this, and this? What are those questions?
Buyers should be asking buyers agents, how many clients are you currently working with? Because they need to know, do you have time for me?
That's a good one. Yeah.
Or do you have agents on it? Are you on a team? Do you have agents that you work with that can show me a house if you're not available? That's are a
good one. Yeah.
Yeah. For a buyer, you need to get out to see the house right away. If it's something that you have to assume that other people are doing the same. So you don't want to have to wait.
And then of
a
course
day or two.
on my end, I'm going to ask, should you ask how you're marketing my house?
Oh, well, that's part of the conversation all the time. Oh, yeah. I mean, I give marketing updates every week to my sellers.
Every week.
I mean, every week. And we didn't used to have to do that a couple of years ago because we
sold.
could market it. Yeah, it was already sold. As long as we got it ready, that looked good, it was good to sell. So, now the marketing is a huge conversation. Every single week I give stats of, here's what it did on socials. Here's how many views we had on Zillow. Here's how many views we had on the MLS. Here's, oh yeah, all that stuff.
Well, it also helps because, again, like you talked about previously, there's so much money at stake here, which means there's so much emotion at stake. And if you don't have that clarity and communication from your realtor, you're like, what are you doing? And even if you're doing a lot, and I get that because we can fall into that trap on our end sometimes with our clients, like we're doing all this stuff, and I'm like, we gotta let our partners know. So that's a great thing for someone to be able to say, so am I going to get updates every week?
And some sellers want updates every day. I mean, I know that's what they want. So that's what we give them. Even if the update is there's no update,
right?
But just a check in. So, I mean, you really have to, as an agent, know what your client needs as well.
It seems that the conversation right now, again, it's very new and everyone's looking into that crystal ball, is that this is going to bring home prices down. Do you think that that's true in your crystal ball?
I don't think it will bring home prices down at the end of the day. I think buyers are not used to having to pay this, whatever that percentage is. Let's say it's 2%, let's say it's 3%. That's a big chunk of change that a buyer has to bring in addition to their down payment and all their closing costs. So at the end of the day, I don't think it's going to change home prices because that's still going to be negotiated in.
Yeah, that makes sense. Hey, thank you so much for having this conversation. Again, this is Deborah Vahle, and she's with the CityLiving Group in Nashville. And we didn't even talk about short-term rentals and developments and all that. This was really kind of big pie. A lot of people can relate to single-family homes. And thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Thanks for having me.